No Man's Sky, boy did it have a lot to live up to, didn't it? We haven't seen a game in the last few years that has ridden the choo-choo hype train through town quite as hard as this one. Is it good? Is it bad? Here's everything wrong with No Man's Sky. Number 1. The lopsided pacing dilemma. So let me share with you how successful and interesting games pace themselves well. First, and then we'll go into why No Man's Sky has it ass backwards. Good pacing usually looks like this. During the first 1 to 3 hours of a fresh game, games are in the introduction phase. The player gets introduced to the plot, the characters, some of the backstory, and more importantly, the core gameplay systems. It's a time to explore, it's fun, it can be exciting, and it ramps up. Think of the classic Zelda games. You've got sword attacks, dashes, bottles to fill, bombs that blow up things. You've got the map to explore. Hours 4 to 10 are where most players will spend their time. It's where players decide if they enjoy the game because it's time to learn, advance and gain competencies, and prepare for the challenges of the game. You've got gameplay systems still rolling out. Keeping with the Zelda theme, you'll find the hook shot, the power glove, the candle to interact and change the environment, and the flippers for exploring those new areas. The mid-game, hours 11 to 15, are for players who have decided that they are going to beat the game and have accepted that they enjoy the core gameplay systems. They know the systems, but now they want the challenge. Player skill is tested by the game providing those new challenges, introducing gameplay variation via more complex skill trees, optional objectives to pad the game length out, new interactions with enemies, etc. But the core gameplay systems don't change much. Then you got the late game. Most players don't even see the end of their games because they don't have the tolerance more hardcore gamers do for completing a game, or because they know there's not going to be anything new introduced. It's just for completionists. It looks like this on paper, and developers craft games like this because it's the best way to hold our attention. It's a tricky balance to design a game that persuades us to continue playing because they have to front load most gameplay introduction to keep us interested and pushing forward from square one. That leaves very little room for systems to pop up after 10 hours into the game, and that's okay because the average gamer often quits around that time, so it's a win-win. No Man's Sky's progression, on the other hand, looks like this. It's completely reversed. During the first 1 to 4 hours of the game, you'll be mining, and more mining. The core gameplay systems that are introduced are mining. That's it. It's a bad way of getting players excited about the game because it fatigues our excitement when we're asked to be bitch workers in order to progress through the game. You'll be running around collecting materials for about 10 hours. Does that sound fun to you? Maybe, maybe not. But eventually, as new things open themselves up during the early game, things do become more interesting. At about 10 hours or so, the game switches gears thankfully, and exploration becomes priority over resource gathering. It seems exciting. You zoom across the galaxy from one star system to the next, your mind racing at the thought of what could be at the center of the universe. But then the game plateaus again, once you take your first light jump across the deep galaxy into a foreign star system. It's back to the grind, and bring some spare batteries because your tool is going to need it. Rinse, repeat, several star systems later, several upgrades to your ship later, and you'll finally get things moving. It takes too long, and the average player is going to tire. I know I did. It's just wonky pacing. Hello, Game Studio. The second thing wrong with No Man's Sky is quite a deal breaker, and I'm going to refer to it as luck of the draw procedural generation. Procedural generation has its pros. It can diversify games, it can create endless content, and bring in plenty of fresh air to a game. Due to the aforementioned pacing dilemma we discussed, however, the problem with No Man's Sky is that the game relies heavily on resource gathering during its first 1 to 5 hours of gameplay, so players will need an abundance of resources to gather, right? But what happens when the procedural generation system screws you over? Yeah, it happens in No Man's Sky. I've died multiple times of thirst and oxygen due to landing on planets that simply don't have what I need to survive. Something must have gone wrong in the coding of the system, in that players do have the chance, although it does seem quite small, to be doomed from the get-go. No, I'm not talking about players who know what they're doing. I'm talking about new players who need a nice buffer of resources and time, more importantly, to grasp the core game. New players will often be roaming around the planets not sure what the hell to do, so if they drop into a planet that already has been generated with, let's say, 20% less mineable resources, it's gonna be a big fucking problem. This can lead into many moments of frustration. The goal of the system should have been to diversify the planet's assets randomly, yet still keep the ratios of resources, animals, and terrain constant, at least during the early stages of the game, so you don't screw over us. Yes, I know this is a survival game, but I need the tools to survive. The third thing wrong with No Man's Sky has to do with performance. It's inexcusable. On the PC, be ready for major hitching, frame rate stutters, lackluster texture work, and subpar draw distances. It's a known issue impacting thousands of systems. Just Google it, you'll find case after case. The fourth thing wrong with No Man's Sky is that the game feels a bit hollow and empty. The journey to the center of the Earth gets repetitive in nature as the core gameplay systems of collecting materials, upgrading your ship, leaving the star system, repeat, gets old. The main problem is that challenge stems from the gameplay loop, so once you've familiarized yourself with where you should be going, what you should be crafting, and where you should not be going, it all starts to feel routine and kind of pointless. The vastness of space should be empty in the same way that an ocean is empty on the surface, but just poke your head under the water and you'll be in a very different world. No Man's Sky's deep space feels empty, and the planets you visit all feel very familiar once you've seen all of the terrain and plants that make up the procedural generation kit. The planets lack personality because they're not handcrafted, and that's always the toss-up when analyzing a procedural game. Do you want more endless content that all feels kind of the same, or do you want real stuff? In No Man's Sky, I feel a bit like walking on a skeleton of a game in some instances because it all feels empty and hollow in spite of that. And finally, No Man's Sky's crafting system is unbelievably dumb. I can't think of a better word for it than just dumb. It's dumb. Many recipes require components to be melded together, and together again with more elements, and again, and then again. The bad part is, most of these elements overlap so randomly with other recipes that you'll often stumble on a "oh fuck" moment when you realize you needed those elements you just upgraded for your ship that you could have used for survivable goods like water or oxygen tools. It's convoluted, it's cryptic, and it just doesn't make any sense. Does this look like a manageable list of components and ingredients for a brand new game? Of course, everything's not bad. The game has an amazing soundtrack and some really awesome visual assets. It's just not the game I thought it was going to be. It's pretty average at best. Hit the subscribe button if you liked the video, guys. I really appreciate the support for the channel very much, and we'll see you guys next video. Take care.